The coolest place in the world. Chapter 1. The hottest day. Before we begin, a small word from Walter. If you enjoy his adventures, do subscribe and join him again for the next one. Now, settle back. The day began hot, and then, with very little imagination, became hotter. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the brass handle on Walter Bramble's back door had grown warm enough to feel as though it had recently been holding a cup of tea. By 10, the flagstones in the garden were giving off little shimmers, and the air above them wobbled like a badly hung curtain. Walter stood in the kitchen wearing a pale cotton shirt, loose trousers, and the expression of a man who had already tried everything sensible and was now considering things which were not. The windows were open. The curtains were half drawn. A bowl of water stood in front of a small electric fan, although the fan seemed more interested in moving warm air from one part of the room to another than in cooling it. Walter had placed a damp handkerchief on the back of his neck. It had helped for nearly 40 seconds. Then it became warm too. On the table beside him, his father's brass pocket watch lay on top of the morning newspaper. Walter had taken it from his waistcoat pocket because even the watch seemed to be contributing to the temperature. He picked it up and held it to his ear. Tick, tick, tick. "Not struggling, then?" he said. The watch offered no sympathy. Outside, Walter's garden looked tired. The lawn had faded to the colour of straw. Nasturtiums drooped from their pots, and the lavender leaned towards the path as though hoping to hear good news from the soil. Even the birds had abandoned their usual arguments. A blackbird stood beneath the hedge with its beak open. A sparrow sat in the shallow stone bird bath and stared at Walter through the kitchen window. Walter stared back. The sparrow lowered itself another inch into the water. "A fair point," Walter said. He filled a second bowl, carried it into the garden and placed it in the shade beneath the apple tree. The shade was not particularly cool. It was simply where the sunshine was slightly less determined. Walter returned indoors, poured himself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The newspaper announced that the country was experiencing the hottest spell for many years. It advised people to remain indoors, drink plenty of fluids, and avoid unnecessary journeys. Walter looked around his kitchen. The walls appeared to be holding the heat in with great care. His cottage was old, cosy, and usually very sensible. In winter, it kept out the wind. In autumn, it held the smell of wood smoke and baked apples. In spring, it seemed to collect bird song around the windows. Today, it had become an oven with framed pictures. Walter drank half his water and unfolded the newspaper. There were photographs of people sitting beneath umbrellas, children running through fountains, and dogs lying flat on tiled floors. One article recommended visiting an air-conditioned shopping centre. Walter considered this. He disliked shopping centres even when they were not being used as emergency shelters. Another article suggested spending time in cool public buildings. Walter stopped. He read the sentence again. Cool public buildings. His eyes moved towards the small pile of books on the dresser. At the bottom lay a library book he had finished the previous evening. It was a history of vanished railway stations, which Walter had found both interesting and faintly melancholy. He rested a finger on the cover. "The library," he said. The word itself seemed cool. Libraries had thick walls, high ceilings, and shaded corners. They had polished floors that never appeared to warm up. They had books which had survived summers far worse than this one without complaint. Most importantly, the village library was built of old grey stone. Walter stood. The room appeared to tilt slightly, although that was probably the heat and not the beginning of anything unusual. He filled a bottle with water, placed the railway book into a canvas bag, and went into the hall. His tweed flat cap hung from its usual peg. Walter looked at it. The cap had belonged to his father, and had accompanied Walter through rain, frost, wind, and several deeply disappointing village fates. It had never failed him. But today, tweed seemed ambitious. He selected a lighter straw hat instead. The flat cap remained on its peg with quiet dignity. Walter slipped his late wife's small notebook into his shirt pocket. He carried it more from habit than necessity. Its pages held her observations, snippets of verse, and Walter's own pencil sketches added over the years. Before leaving, he glanced into the hall mirror. The straw hat made him look like a man about to inspect a vineyard. "That will have to do," he said. The moment he opened the front door, the heat stepped towards him. It seemed almost solid. Walter closed the door behind him and stood beneath the little porch. The road shimmered. Hedges hung still. Curtains were drawn across nearly every house. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn-mower started, ran for 5 seconds, and stopped, presumably after its owner reconsidered every decision that had led to that moment. Walter began walking. He kept to the shaded side of the street, although the shade moved in narrow strips and was sometimes no wider than his shoes. At the end of the lane he met Mrs. Jenkins coming the other way. She wore a large sun hat decorated with cloth flowers and carried a shopping bag in each hand. "Morning, Walter," she said. "Good morning." "Hot." "Very. I bought butter." Walter nodded. "It melted before I reached the chemist." "That seems unnecessarily efficient." "I'm carrying it in a mug now." She lifted one of the bags slightly. Walter did not ask why she happened to have a mug. Mrs. Jenkins was the sort of person who often had exactly the wrong object at precisely the right time. "Going far?" she asked. "The library." "Good idea. Cold in there." "Cool, certainly." "No, cold. I went in yesterday and had to keep my cardigan on." Walter looked at the cardigan draped over her arm. "You brought it today?" "I always carry one." "In a heat wave?" "You never know." Walter accepted this. Mrs. Jenkins appeared prepared for several climates at once. They wished each other well and continued in opposite directions. The village looked deserted. Outside the bakery, a handwritten sign read, "Closed early due to heat. Bread also tired." Walter approved of the second line. The butcher had placed a bucket of water outside for dogs. The florist had moved all its flowers into the back of the shop. At the bus stop, 2 people stood beneath the shelter, although the shelter was made of glass and had become a small transparent greenhouse. Walter took the longer route through the churchyard because the yew trees offered shade. Beneath them, the air felt only moderately cooked. He paused beside the old stone wall and drank from his bottle. A butterfly rested on a gravestone with its wings closed. Everything seemed to be waiting. The village clock struck 11. Each note drifted through the heavy air and appeared to slow before reaching the ground. Walter crossed the final road and saw the library ahead. It stood at the edge of the square, tall and grey, with arched windows and a broad wooden door beneath a stone porch. Ivy climbed one side of the building, and the lower leaves barely moved. The library had once been a private house, then a school, then a council office, and, for a brief but confusing period, a museum of agricultural hinges. It had been a library for nearly 100 years. Walter climbed the steps. The brass handle felt cool. He noticed this at once. He pushed open the door. A breath of air moved over him, not cold air exactly, but deep, shaded, stone-kept coolness. It carried the smell of old paper, floor polish, and something faintly minty from the librarian's desk. Walter stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The silence settled around him. For several seconds he did nothing. He simply stood beneath the high ceiling and allowed the heat to leave him. His shoulders lowered. The damp handkerchief at the back of his neck finally became useful again. From behind the main desk, Mrs. Finch looked up. She wore a dark green blouse and a pair of half-moon spectacles suspended from a silver chain. Her grey hair was pinned neatly at the back of her head, as though the weather had failed to receive permission to disturb it. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said. Walter removed his straw hat. "Did you? Everyone comes to the library during a heat wave." "Not everyone." Mrs. Finch glanced towards the reading room. Walter followed her gaze. 3 people were asleep in armchairs. A 4th sat beneath the ceiling fan, reading the same page of a gardening magazine with great concentration. Near the history shelves, a small dog lay on the floor beside an elderly man. A handwritten card attached to its collar read, "I am allowed in because the pavement is too hot." Walter smiled. "It seems you're running a refuge." "Libraries have always been refuges," Mrs. Finch replied. "The reasons merely change." Walter placed his returned book on the desk. Mrs. Finch examined the cover. "Vanished railway stations." "Very good." "Cheerful?" "Not especially." Railway books rarely are. They always seem disappointed that the past has left without consulting them. She stamped the book and set it aside. Walter glanced around. The old stone walls seemed to hold centuries of cool weather within them. Sunlight entered through the upper windows in pale, dusty beams, but never quite reached the floor. A fan turned slowly above the desk. Its blades made a soft wooden click with each rotation. "You were right," Walter said. "About what?" "The library." "I usually am." "I meant that it would be cool." "So did I." Mrs. Finch adjusted her spectacles. "There is iced water in the reading room. Cucumber in one jug, lemon in the other." Mr. Cobb confused them and complained that his lemonade tasted of salad. Walter looked towards the far tables. He had intended to find a chair, choose a book and remain in the library until the sun lost interest. Then he noticed something. A display table stood beneath the central staircase. Walter was certain it had not been there during his previous visit. The table was narrow, round, and made of pale wood. No sign explained its purpose. No stack of novels surrounded it. There was only one book. Its cover was blue. Not the dark blue of ink or the bright blue of summer sky, but the pale blue found inside old ice. Silver lines curled across its surface, forming the shapes of mountains, trees, and streams. Walter stepped closer. The air around the table felt cooler than the rest of the library. He stopped. Mrs. Finch continued sorting returned books. Walter held his hand above the cover. A faint chill touched his palm. "What is this?" he asked. Mrs. Finch did not look up. "A book." "I had gathered that." "You asked?" Walter leaned closer. Tiny crystals clung to the edges of the cover. They looked like frost. He touched one with the tip of his finger. It did not melt. The title was pressed into the blue leather in narrow silver lettering. "The Coolest Place in the World." Walter read it twice. "Seasonal," he said. Mrs. Finch placed a travel guide onto her trolley. "Very." "Where did it come from?" "The basement." "I didn't know the library had a basement." "It doesn't always." Walter looked at her. Mrs. Finch looked back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The fan clicked overhead. From the reading room came the soft snore of someone who had stopped pretending to read. Walter returned his attention to the book. "Who wrote it?" "There's no author listed." "Publisher?" "None." "Date?" Mrs. Finch considered. "Possibly winter." Walter smiled despite himself. He opened the cover. A small gust of cold air escaped. It passed over his hands and stirred the front of his shirt. On the first page, written in blue ink, were the words, "For those who have had quite enough of summer." Walter glanced at Mrs. Finch. She raised one eyebrow. "That seems rather specific," he said. "Books often know their audience." Walter turned the page. An illustration filled the paper. It showed a mountain valley beneath a clear sky. Snow lay on distant peaks. A lake shone green between forests. Wooden houses clustered beside a narrow river, and tiny white flowers covered the meadows. The picture was so detailed that Walter could see smoke rising from chimneys. He lowered his face towards the page. The air smelled of pine. He heard something faint. A bell, then another. Slow, distant notes, like cattle moving across a hillside. Walter looked around the library. No one else appeared to have noticed. He bent closer again. A breeze moved through the illustrated grass. The flowers trembled. Walter straightened. The page was moving. Not turning. Moving. Cloud shadows crossed the mountains. The lake rippled. A bird flew from one painted tree to another. "Mrs. Finch," Walter said quietly. "Yes?" "The illustration appears to be alive. Some books are more engaging than others." "That is not what engaging usually means." The cold air strengthened. It flowed around Walter's wrists and curled beneath his sleeves. The edges of the page lifted. Loose papers stirred on the nearby tables. One of the sleeping readers opened an eye, decided nothing required action, and closed it again. Walter reached for the book, intending to shut it. Before his fingers touched the cover, the silver lines began to glow. The room faded. The staircase stretched upwards and became a mountain path. The polished floor darkened into damp earth. The tall bookcases narrowed, rose and transformed into pine trees. Walter felt the strange dropping sensation he knew all too well. His straw hat lifted from his head. He caught it with one hand. The library vanished. Walter stood in bright sunlight. He waited for the heat. It did not come. Instead, cool air filled his lungs. He breathed in again. Pine, water, snow. A breeze moved across his face, fresh enough to make him laugh aloud. The sound travelled across a wide green valley. Walter turned slowly. Behind him rose a wall of dark fir trees. Ahead lay an emerald lake, clear enough to reveal pale stones beneath its surface. Beyond it, mountains climbed towards a blue sky, their upper slopes white with snow. A narrow stream ran beside the path. Walter knelt and placed his hand in the water. It was wonderfully cold. He splashed some onto his face. Drops ran down his cheeks and onto his collar. For the first time that day, he felt properly awake. "Much better," he said. A cowbell sounded nearby. Walter looked up. A line of brown cattle moved across a meadow above the lake. Their bells rang softly as they walked through the flowers. On the far shore stood a village of wooden houses with steep roofs and painted shutters. Thin curls of smoke rose from several chimneys. Walter checked his shirt pocket. The notebook was still there. He checked his trousers. The pocket watch was not. Then he remembered leaving it on the kitchen table. "Probably sensible," he said. He placed his straw hat back on his head and followed the path towards the village. The air remained cool, though the sun shone brightly. Butterflies moved among the meadow flowers. Water tumbled over stones beside him. After several minutes, Walter reached a wooden bridge. A sign beside it read, "Welcome to Valefrost. Please do not disturb the seasons." Walter read the sign again. Below it, in smaller letters, someone had added, "They are temperamental." Walter crossed the bridge. Halfway over, he stopped. At the center of the village stood a tall wooden tower. Its roof was covered in silver shingles. Beneath the roof, instead of a clock face, there was a great circular window divided into 4 colored sections: green, gold, red, blue. A single hand pointed towards the blue section. The tower bell hung motionless above it. Villagers had gathered in the square below. They looked worried. An old man wearing a heavy wool coat stood on a ladder with his head inside an open panel at the base of the tower. A woman held the ladder steady. A boy carried a toolbox from one person to another, though no one appeared to know what to do with it. Walter continued across the bridge. As he entered the square, the old man withdrew his head from the tower. "It has stopped," he announced. "We know," said the woman holding the ladder. "That is why you are looking at it. It has never stopped. Until now," the villagers murmured. Walter stood at the edge of the group. The boy with the toolbox noticed him first. "You're not from here," he said. Walter looked down. "No." "Are you a clockmaker?" "No." "Engineer?" "No." Seasonal mechanic? I'm afraid not. The boy frowned. What are you then? Walter thought about this. Retired. The boy nodded gravely, as though this might be an advanced qualification. The old man climbed down from the ladder. He had white hair, a square beard and eyebrows which seemed to have been made for colder weather. You came from beyond the forest? He asked, in a manner of speaking. Then you arrived at a difficult time. Walter looked around at the snow-capped mountains, the cool lake and the green meadows. I've known more uncomfortable ones. The old man pointed towards the circular window. That is the season clock. Walter studied it. It appears to be pointing at winter. It has pointed at winter for 3 days. Is it winter? It is supposed to be early summer. Walter felt the cool breeze again. Your early summer is very pleasant. It will not remain pleasant. The woman released the ladder and turned towards him. If the clock does not move, the valley will continue to cool. The snow line will descend. The streams will freeze. The crops will fail. Walter looked at the bright meadows. Nothing appeared wrong. That was often how trouble began. Quietly, politely, while everyone was admiring the view. What makes the clock move? He asked. The villagers exchanged glances. The old man folded his arms. The valley does? That is not especially clear. The clock listens to the seasons. It feels the warmth of the soil, the height of the river, the length of the daylight, and the movements of the animals. Then it turns. Walter looked up at the unmoving hand. So either the clock is broken, or the valley has forgotten it is summer, said the woman. A silence followed. From somewhere behind the houses came the hollow sound of ice cracking. The villagers turned. A thin white line had appeared across the edge of the village fountain. Walter approached it. He placed one finger on the water. A skin of ice was forming, in full sunlight. The boy with the toolbox moved closer. Can you fix it? Walter looked at the tower, then at the mountains, then at the blue book, which was now lying closed on a bench beside the fountain. He had not noticed it arrive. A silver frost crystal formed on its cover. Walter picked it up. The book felt cold in his hands. He had come to the library merely to escape the heat. Now he appeared to have found rather more coolness than anyone required. Walter opened his wife's notebook and turned to a blank page. At the top he wrote, Valefrost, season clock stopped, summer missing. He paused, then added, Bring cardigan next time. The boy peered at the writing. What will you do? Walter closed the notebook. I think, he said, looking towards the frozen fountain, I shall begin by finding out where your summer has gone. High above the village, the bell inside the tower moved once. It gave a single, low note. Then everything became still again. And somewhere beyond the mountains, something answered. Thank you for joining Walter. His journey through the valley continues in Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Beneath the Glacier. The single note from the great bell lingered over the valley long after the sound itself had faded. Walter stood quite still in the village square. Around him, nobody seemed eager to speak. The villagers looked towards the mountains, not because they expected to see anything, but because it felt as though whatever had answered the bell had done so from somewhere amongst the snow-covered peaks. A breeze drifted through the square. It was colder than before. Walter noticed the baker, Mara, rubbing her hands together. Only half an hour earlier she had been standing comfortably in shirt sleeves. Now she was wishing she had brought a coat. Master Holland climbed slowly down from his ladder beside the season clock. "It has become worse," he murmured. Walter looked up. The great hand of the clock remained firmly within the blue quarter. Winter. Not moving. Not even a fraction. "What happens if it stays there?" Walter asked. The old clock-keeper looked at the mountains. "The valley forgets summer." Walter had heard stranger sentences in his life, not many. But surely summer still exists. "It does elsewhere," Master Holland sighed. "Not here." They gathered inside the village hall while the afternoon sun continued shining outside with complete indifference. The hall was built from warm, honey-colored timber, yet somehow the air inside felt cooler every minute. Walter accepted a mug of herbal tea from Mara. "It seems odd drinking something hot," he admitted. "It warms the hands," she replied. Walter considered this excellent reasoning. Pip, who had attached himself firmly to Walter for the remainder of the day, unfolded a large map across one of the tables. "This is the valley." Walter leaned over it. It was beautifully drawn. The lake sat in the center like an emerald jewel. The village occupied the southern shore. Dark forests covered the western slopes. To the north, the mountains rose steeply before disappearing beneath a great sweep of pale blue ice. Walter pointed. "The glacier." Master Holland nodded. "It feeds every stream." "And the season clock?" "It listens to the glacier." Walter frowned. "I've never known a clock to listen." "Our clock does." He said it so matter-of-factly that Walter decided there was little point arguing. Master Holland placed one finger on the map. "Long ago, before the village existed, the people who settled here discovered something beneath the ice." "What?" "They never told anyone." "That seems unhelpful." "They believe some knowledge should only be passed from one keeper to the next." "And was it?" "It was." "So, you know." Master Holland looked rather embarrassed. "My grandfather intended to explain everything." Walter waited. "He died unexpectedly." "I see." "My father thought grandfather had already explained." "And your father?" "He also died unexpectedly." Walter nodded sympathetically. "So the information rather evaporated." "Unfortunately." Pip looked at Walter. "I know where the old path is." 3 adults answered together. "No." Pip sighed. "I knew you'd say that." By late afternoon, the cold had become impossible to ignore. Thin, lace-like frost appeared around the edge of the fountain. Children who had been paddling in the lake only hours earlier now wore knitted jumpers. Walter stood beside the bridge, looking towards the glacier. The blue book appeared in his canvas bag. He hadn't put it there. He wasn't even particularly surprised. He removed it carefully. The silver letters on the cover glistened. The coolest place in the world. The book felt colder than before, almost alive. When Walter opened it, the pages turned without his help. They stopped at an illustration. It showed the glacier, not from outside, from underneath. There, beneath hundreds of feet of ancient ice, stood a pair of enormous carved doors. Walter studied the picture. The doors were surrounded by lanterns. Figures carrying books climbed wide stone steps. Books, not tools. Books. He showed the illustration to Master Hollin. The old man's face lost what little color remained. "I hope that place was only a story." "You've heard of it?" "My grandfather once spoke about—" He stopped. About what? The library beneath the ice. The journey began before sunset. Walter, Master Hollin, Mara, Pip. The four of them followed a narrow path, climbing steadily towards the glacier. The village became smaller beneath them. The lake reflected the evening light like polished glass. Walter noticed tiny white flowers growing between the rocks. They reminded him of stars scattered across the mountainside. "Do they always flower this late?" Mara shook her head. "They should have finished weeks ago." Walter knelt beside one. Its petals were edged with frost. "Curious. The whole valley is becoming confused." The climb grew steeper. Soon they entered a forest of towering pine trees. Here the air smelled wonderfully fresh, the scent of resin mixed with cold water tumbling over rocks. Walter found himself breathing deeply. "I could stay here forever." Pip grinned. "Everyone says that." "And do they?" "No." They emerged from the trees just as the glacier came fully into view. Walter stopped. He had never imagined ice could possess so many colors. It wasn't simply white. There were ribbons of turquoise, great sheets of sapphire, veins of crystal so clear they looked like frozen air itself. The glacier groaned. A deep sound, almost like an old wooden ship settling at anchor. Walter instinctively removed his hat. It somehow felt polite. "Does it always make that noise?" Master Hollin nodded. "It is moving." "It looks perfectly still." "So do our hands." Walter smiled. That was rather good. Pip hurried ahead. "I found it." Half hidden beneath snow stood an enormous stone arch. It had almost disappeared beneath centuries of drifting ice. Only the upper curve remained visible. Walter brushed snow away with his hands. Letters appeared. They weren't carved. They seemed frozen inside the stone itself. He read them aloud. "Every season has a story. Nothing more. No instructions, no warning, no explanation." Walter stepped beneath the arch. Immediately the temperature changed, not colder, calmer. The glacier seemed to fall silent. Even the wind stopped. Master Hollin approached, carrying an old iron lantern. My grandfather always said never enter without light. Did he say why? No. Another family tradition? I'm afraid so. Walter laughed quietly. I've known families who never passed down grandmother's sponge cake recipe. Yours appears to have misplaced the workings of the entire valley. Even Master Hollin chuckled. Beyond the arch lay a tunnel. Not natural, perfectly smooth. The walls glittered with tiny trapped air bubbles. Walter ran one hand across the surface. The ice felt dry, not wet, not slippery, almost like polished marble. Their footsteps echoed softly. Somewhere ahead came another sound, pages turning. Walter stopped. So I'm not imagining that. Mara listened. No. It was unmistakable. Books. Hundreds of pages gently turning, as though a breeze moved through an invisible library. The tunnel curved. A pale blue light appeared. Then the passage widened. Walter stepped through first. His breath caught. Before them stretched the most extraordinary library he had ever seen. Shelves carved entirely from crystal blue ice climbed higher than any building in Valefrost. Thousands upon thousands of books rested upon them. Golden lamps floated gently through the air without chains or candles. Long bridges crossed between galleries. Water trickled silently beneath glass-like floors. The entire place glowed with peaceful blue light. No one spoke. They simply stared. Finally, Walter whispered the only words that seemed appropriate. "Oh, my." A voice echoed gently from somewhere amongst the shelves. "We've been expecting you." An elderly woman emerged wearing a robe the color of winter clouds. Her white hair reached almost to her waist. She smiled warmly, despite the freezing surroundings. "You've arrived later than we hoped." Walter removed his straw hat. "I'm terribly sorry." She blinked. "You apologize before knowing what you've done?" "I find it saves time." The woman laughed. It sounded like icicles chiming in a gentle breeze. "My name is Keeper Celine, Walter Bramble." "I know." "You do?" "Books remember their readers." Walter glanced uneasily towards the blue volume still tucked beneath his arm. "I rather thought they might." Celine looked towards the ceiling where faint cracks glimmered high within the glacier. "The valley is losing its summers. We've noticed. It is happening because something has disappeared." Walter looked around at the endless shelves. "A book." Celine nodded. "The oldest one." She turned. "Come with me." Walter followed. The others came behind. They crossed bridge after bridge until they reached a circular chamber at the very center of the library. There stood 4 magnificent pedestals. 3 held enormous leather-bound books. One stood empty. Dusting the empty pedestal was a thin layer of sparkling frost. Celine rested one hand upon it. "This is where the Book of Summer belongs." Walter looked carefully. "It has been stolen?" Celine shook her head slowly. "No." "What then?" It walked away. Walter looked from the empty pedestal to the elderly librarian. Ordinarily, he would have questioned such a statement. Standing beneath a glacier inside a magical library carved from ice, however, it seemed remarkably reasonable. Somewhere far above them, the season clock struck once, and this time the sound came from beneath the ice. Chapter 3. Where Summer Had Gone. The sound from beneath the ice rolled through the circular chamber and faded slowly into the frozen walls. Walter stood beside the empty pedestal. The 3 remaining books rested upon their stands. Spring, autumn, winter. Each one seemed perfectly calm. Only the space where the Book of Summer had once stood appeared disturbed. A faint golden mark remained upon the ice, like the shape left behind after moving a picture from a sunlit wall. Keeper Celine lowered her lantern. "The clock has begun calling for it," she said. Walter looked towards the ceiling. "And the book is answering?" "I do not know. That makes 2 of us." Pip stepped closer to the pedestal. "Could it be hiding?" Mara folded her arms. "Books do not hide." Walter looked at the great blue volume beneath his arm. "I would not make too many firm statements about books today." Master Hollins stared at the empty stand. "If the Book of Summer does not return before sunset, winter will settle over the valley." "How long?" Walter asked. Hollin took out a small silver watch. "Less than 2 hours." Walter turned slowly around the chamber. He did not feel hurried. He felt thoughtful. There was a difference. Being hurried usually made people move quickly without seeing anything properly. Being thoughtful could look like standing still, even when the answer was nearby. Walter walked around the pedestal. No marks on the floor, no scratches, no dropped pages. Nothing to suggest the book had been carried away. He crouched. At the base of the stand lay a single drop of water. He touched it. Warm. Not hot. Only warm enough to feel unusual in a room made of ice. "Has this been here long?" he asked. Keeper Celine knelt beside him. "I had not noticed it." Another drop fell. It landed on the pedestal with a small, clear sound. Everyone looked up. Far above them, a thin golden line ran through the ceiling. A crack in the ice. Walter watched. A 3rd drop gathered. It trembled, then fell. "Something warm is above us," he said. Celine raised her lantern. "The old memory vault. Can we reach it?" "We can." Pip took 1 step towards the door. Mara caught his sleeve. "You are not going first." "I wasn't." "You were." "I was going near first." "Which is another kind of first." Keeper Celine led them from the chamber and into a narrow passage behind the shelves. The walls here were darker, the ice older and filled with long white lines. Their footsteps echoed as they climbed a steep spiral staircase. The higher they went, the warmer the air became. Walter removed his straw hat. The scent around him began to change. At first, there was only cold stone and ice. Then came something green, cut grass. After that, wood smoke, then blossom, then damp leaves. The smells of different seasons mingled together in a way that felt both pleasant and wrong. Walter paused. "Does it always smell like this?" "No," Celine said. "It should smell of nothing." "That seems a waste." They reached a heavy door bound with silver metal. Celine took 3 keys from her belt. "The vault has not been opened for many years." "Why not?" Mara asked. "Because some memories began combining." Pip looked interested. "What happens then?" "You may remember sledging in July." "That sounds good." "You may remember swimming beneath the ice." "That sounds less good." Celine unlocked the door. A rush of warm air moved over them. Inside, thousands of colored lights floated through a vast, round chamber. Green sparks drifted like fireflies. Red and gold lights turned slowly in the air. Blue lights glimmered like snow caught in moonlight. Every time 2 sparks touched, a fragment of sound appeared. A cuckoo calling, rain against glass, children laughing, a shovel cutting through snow. Walter stepped carefully into the room. At the center stood a glass vessel taller than a man. It was cracked. Golden light shone from within it. The vessel contained hundreds of tiny summer memories turning in a tight circle. Walter moved closer. He could hear them. Water splashing beside a lake. Bees around lavender. Teacups placed on garden tables. A distant lawnmower. Someone opening a window at dusk. Around the golden lights, a shell of blue memories had formed. Winter wrapped around summer. Master Hollin pointed. "There. Winter has trapped it." Walter shook his head. "No." Hollin looked at him. "It clearly has. It is holding it together." Walter watched the blue lights. They pressed gently inward whenever the golden ones struck the cracked glass. Without them, the summer memories would scatter through the vault. "Winter is protecting it," Walter said, "or trying to." Keeper Celine came beside him. "Why would the seasons mix in this way?" "Perhaps they are not as separate as your shelves suggest." Celine did not answer. Walter opened his wife's notebook. The pages turned in the warm air. He stopped at an entry in her handwriting. It described a summer afternoon many years ago. They had planned to sit outside beneath the apple tree. Instead, rain had arrived suddenly and driven them into the little wooden shed at the end of the garden. Walter remembered it clearly. They had sat on overturned plant pots while water hammered on the roof. His wife had laughed because he had tried to carry 3 cups of tea at once and lost half of one into his shoe. At the bottom of the page she had written, "Summer is not only sunshine, sometimes it is the smell of rain afterwards." Walter read the line again. Then he looked at the spinning lights. "Tell me," he said, "when did it last rain in Valefrost?" No one answered. Walter looked at Mara. She frowned. "Not for some time." "How long?" "All summer." Pip shook his head. "Longer than that." "You have had no summer rain." Master Hollin rubbed his beard. Rainfall has been discouraged. Discouraged. The village council decided visitors preferred sunshine. Walter stared at him. You discourage the weather? Only informally. Mara looked embarrassed. We rang the bright day bell whenever clouds appeared. And what happened? The clouds moved away. Walter closed the notebook. How long have you been doing that? Master Hollin looked at the floor. 23 years. Even Keeper Celine appeared surprised. You altered the valley's seasons. We thought we were improving them. By removing rain and cool evenings, Mara admitted. And mist, said Pip. And storms, added Hollin. Walter looked towards the vessel. You did not improve summer. You removed everything except sunshine. The golden memories struck the glass again. The blue shell tightened around them. Walter understood. Summer had not simply disappeared. It had been worn out. Year after year, the valley had demanded brightness, warmth, and blue skies. No pauses, no rain, no fresh mornings, no relief. Even the Book of Summer had needed somewhere cool to rest. Where would it go? Pip asked. Walter thought of the illustration in the blue book, the lake, the mountains, the village, and beneath it all, the glacier. The coolest place in the valley, he said. We are already beneath a glacier, Mara replied. The coolest place is not always the coldest. Walter turned to Celine. Where do the summer memories naturally gather? The lake, she said slowly. Water holds reflections, sound and warmth. And where does the lake remain coolest? Near the glacier stream, Pip smiled. I know the place. Mara sighed. Of course you do. They hurried back through the library. The journey felt longer now. The silver lamps flickered. A thin layer of frost spread across the bridges. Books shivered on the shelves. As they passed the empty pedestal, the season clock rang again. The note was weaker. Master Hollin looked at his watch. An hour. They climbed the long staircase to the surface. When the ice door opened, the valley had changed. Snow fell lightly from a clear sky. The meadow flowers bowed beneath white dust. The lake, which had glittered green when Walter arrived, had turned dark and still. Ice had begun to creep from the shore. The village roofs were white. Walter pulled on his hat. Lead the way. Pip ran down the path. Mara followed with the expression of someone determined to remain close enough to catch him if necessary. Walter and the others descended more carefully. By the time they reached the lake, the sunlight had weakened. The mountains cast long blue shadows across the water. Pip pointed towards a narrow inlet where the glacier stream entered the lake. There, a sheet of ice covered the inlet. Beneath it, something glowed. Gold. Walter knelt at the edge. The light moved below the frozen surface. Not quickly, slowly, like a sleeping creature turning beneath a blanket. The book, Celine whispered. Master Hollin struck the ice with the handle of his key. Nothing happened. Again. The ice did not crack. We need tools, Mara said. No, Walter replied. He rested one hand on the frozen surface. The ice was not keeping them out. It was protecting what lay beneath. Breaking it would solve nothing. Walter removed his wife's notebook. He opened it to the page about the summer rain. Then he placed the open notebook flat upon the ice. At first, nothing happened. The others watched. A breeze moved over the lake. The words on the page began to glow. The golden light beneath the surface rose slowly. Walter heard a sound. Rain on a shed roof. His wife laughing. A cup rattling against a saucer. The memory spread across the ice. A crack appeared, not sharp or violent. A gentle line opened beneath the notebook. Warm water seeped around the page without wetting it. The ice parted. From beneath the lake, a book rose to the surface. It was large and bound in faded gold cloth. Its cover had once been bright, but the color was worn pale. The Book of Summer floated towards Walter. He lifted it from the water. It felt tired. There was no other word for it. The cover sagged slightly in his hands. The pages barely moved. On the front, beneath the faded title, a new line appeared. I needed shade. Walter sat back on his heels. I understand. The letters changed. They would not let me rest. I know. Only sunshine. Too much of anything becomes tiring. Behind him, Master Hollin cleared his throat. We thought people liked it. The words appeared again. People also like sleep. Walter smiled. A very reasonable book. Mara knelt beside him. What does it need? Walter looked towards the sky. The clouds had gathered beyond the western peaks. Dark, heavy clouds. They had been kept away for years. Now they waited at the edge of the valley. It needs a proper summer, he said. Master Hollin looked at the clock tower in the distance. How do we give it one? Walter stood and handed the book to Keeper Celine. Stop ringing the bright day bell. That is all. No. He looked at the clouds. Ring the season clock instead. They returned to the village as the first wind moved down from the mountains. Not an icy wind, a cool, damp wind carrying the smell of rain. The villagers gathered in the square. Some looked frightened by the clouds. Others stood with their faces turned upwards, as though remembering something they had forgotten. Keeper Celine placed the Book of Summer upon the stone beneath the clock tower. Walter climbed the ladder with Master Hollin. At the top they opened the wooden panel. Inside, wheels and rods trembled with frost. At the center sat a clear crystal shaped like a heart. Its lower half glowed blue, its upper half was dark. The book must be returned beneath the glacier, Hollin said. Not yet. Walter touched the crystal. First, the valley must remember. The first drop of rain landed on the tower roof. Then another. A third struck Walter's hand, warm rain. Below, Pip laughed. The villagers gasped as the shower began. It fell gently over the square. Rain darkened the wooden roofs. It tapped on windows. It filled the fountain. The frost on the stones softened and melted. Mara stood in the rain with her eyes closed. "I had forgotten the smell," she said. Across the village, doors opened. Children stepped into the street. Someone began laughing. Then the Book of Summer opened. Its pages turned rapidly in the rain. Golden light rose from it and travelled up the tower. The crystal heart flared. The great hand of the season clock moved, first away from winter, then towards spring, then onwards. It stopped in the golden quarter. Summer. But this time the gold was threaded with green, red, and blue. All 4 seasons within it. The bell rang. A full, rich note rolled across the valley. The mountains answered. The glacier answered. The lake answered with ripples beneath the rain. Walter climbed down from the ladder. Master Hollin followed. Keeper Celine closed the Book of Summer. Its cover had regained its colour. Bright gold. "It will return to the library now," she said. "Will it stay?" Celine looked at Master Hollin. "That depends on the village." Hollin raised one hand. "No more bright day bell," Mara added, "and no more chasing clouds away." Pip grinned. "Can we have storms?" "Occasionally," Walter said. "Everything in balance." The rain lasted exactly 20 minutes, long enough to wash the dust from the leaves, long enough to fill the air with the scent of earth, long enough for summer to feel like summer again. Afterwards, the clouds parted. Evening sunlight spread across the wet village. Every roof shone. The meadow flowers lifted. Mist rose from the lake. The temperature was neither hot nor cold. It was perfect. Mara insisted that Walter eat before leaving. Tables were carried into the square. Bread, cheese, apples, and bowls of berries appeared. Someone played a fiddle. Pip attempted to explain the entire adventure to several children at once, and improved it considerably. Master Hollin gave Walter a small white stone from the edge of the glacier stream. "It will remain cool," he said. "For how long?" "As long as you remember the valley." Walter placed it in his pocket. "That may be a very long time." Keeper Celine returned the Book of Summer to the library beneath the ice. Before she left, she turned to Walter. "You carried a memory into the vault." "My wife's." It reminded Summer what it had forgotten. Walter touched the notebook in his pocket. She was good at that. By twilight, the blue book lay open on the bench beside the fountain, its pages lifted in the evening breeze. Walter knew it was time. He said goodbye to Pip, Mara, and Master Hollin. Then he placed one hand upon the open page. The village blurred. The mountains softened. Rain, bells, and laughter folded together. Walter felt the familiar dropping sensation. The valley vanished. He was standing once more beneath the staircase in the village library. The blue book lay closed on the display table. Only a few seconds appeared to have passed. The readers in the armchairs were still asleep. The ceiling fan still clicked. Mrs. Finch stood behind the desk. She looked at Walter's damp shirt. Rain? A little. Where? Elsewhere. She nodded as though this were a perfectly sufficient answer. Walter reached into his pocket and removed the white stone. It was still cool. Mrs. Finch touched it with one finger. Glacial. Very. Did you find the coolest place in the world? Walter looked around the library, at the high ceiling, the shaded windows, the long shelves, the quiet readers. Then he thought of the lake, the rain, and the tired book of summer resting beneath the ice. "I've found several," he said. Outside, thunder rumbled. Everyone in the library looked towards the windows. The sky had darkened. Large raindrops struck the glass. One by one, the sleeping readers woke. Mrs. Finch walked to the door and opened it. Cool air flowed into the room. The heat wave had broken. Walter stepped beneath the stone porch. Rain fell across the village square. Children ran through it. People stood beneath shop awnings and smiled. The road shone. Steam rose from the warm pavements. Walter put on his straw hat. Although it provided very little protection, he did not mind. He walked home slowly through the rain. At his cottage the sparrow was still sitting in the bird bath. Now the bowl overflowed. Walter opened the kitchen door. The rooms already felt cooler. His father's pocket watch remained on the table. Tick, tick, tick. He picked it up and placed it back in his pocket. Then he sat beside the open window and listened to the rain. Somewhere in the distance a church bell sounded. Walter smiled. Even sunshine needed somewhere to rest. And sometimes, he thought, so did people. The end.